Today I'm going to show you how to make Japanese iced coffee, an incredibly refreshing and delicious coffee drink that I can't seem to stop making. It's both faster to make than cold brew, much tastier than iced coffee, and best of all, it's cheaper than anything you can buy at the store or at the coffee shop. And it takes no longer to make than a standard pour over, and of course it's black coffee, which means it's calories. Sure, you can add cream and stuff if you want, but I recommend you try it black. And to start off, we need 30 grams of coffee.
The whole coffee beans go into the grinder for a fine coarse grind similar to the thickness of kosher salt. Then set some water to heat at 205 degrees Fahrenheit or 96 degrees for the rest of the world. After, into a coffee decanter, we had 250 grams of ice made from good quality water.
Now you might be wondering, do I need to measure out the ice every single time I want to make this coffee? And the answer, yes. However, there's a much easier way. Basically weigh out and find an average of what your ice cubes weigh, and then count how many ice cubes you'll need to reach 250 grams. Plus or minus 5 grams is not going to break the bank, and you'll see why later as it dilutes. So for me, I'm going to need about 36 ice cubes.
Next, we prepare the filter by placing it into the dripper and rinsing with water to remove any paper taste. Drain as best as possible and onto the decanter it goes. Make sure to tar your scale and add your 30 grams of coffee grounds. Even them out by shaking the dripper, then it's time for the bloom. Add twice as much water as you have coffee, so in this case we're adding 60 grams of water. Then allow it to bloom for 45 seconds, which is longer than normal but will yield a crisper flavor. You can use a timer, simply count out loud, or just practice your dance moves. Or you could just listen for the snap, crackle, and pop to stop, similar to popcorn. Now we need to finish the brew. Slowly add enough water to equal 275 grams of total water. And when I say slowly, I mean slow. However, you should be able to finish the brew in under 3 minutes. And again, if you don't have a timer, just keep adding water until you reach 275 grams.
Little ramekins were great for putting pour over coffee stuff.
You want to swirl the coffee around to ensure the temperature of the coffee equalizes with the ice.
So this is the reason you don't really have to worry about the ice, because it's not going to completely melt, and some people like to add ice as well when they pour this into the coffee. I think this works just great.
Then, to serve, simply pour the coffee into a glass. I find a pint glass works best. Also, note that perfect pour.
Now, what type of coffee should you use? I'm personally a fan of medium roast coffees that are earthy, chocolatey, but for this brew method, a light roast works really, really well. The fruit and citrus notes really shine through for a nice flavorful crisp, crisp cup of joe. So why is Japanese iced coffee great? If we think of it on a spectrum from cold brew down to iced coffee, cold brew is great for low acidity, works great with medium roast coffees because it isn't using a heat extraction, so we're not going to get a lot of those subtleties. However, it takes time to make, at least 12 hours, so you have to plan ahead. On the other hand, we have iced coffee, which is super fast to make, but typically it tastes a little burnt, and I find you have to add cream and sugar to actually get it to taste good. So it's going to ruin any sort of subtleness, and it's not going to be as refreshing. It's also going to be very diluted because we're adding ice to coffee that was already made appropriately. Somewhere in the middle, we have Japanese iced coffee right alongside pour-over. The reason this works really well is because we are using a heat extraction, and we're also accounting for the dilution, which is why we add 30 grams of coffee. This brings out the subtleties of the coffee roast, which is why light coffees work really, really well here. However, when you buy coffee for this, you have to make sure you get the right kind. Something that might be a blonde roast like the Starbucks Verdana has tasty notes of both toasted malt and baking chocolate, which isn't exactly something I would think of as refreshing. So I'm using something that I found at the store, which is Wicked Joe's. It's a light roast. It also has fruity and citrusy notes, brings out the subtleties, and it really is really refreshing, which reminds me.
It is mighty warm out here. Hi, D.
Hey, Jack, brought you something.
Thank you. What do you think?
That's mighty good.
Clean, crisp, refreshing. I like it. Glad you enjoyed it. This place looks familiar. Yeah, it does look familiar. Also, it's hot as balls.
You wouldn't happen to have any more of that cold coffee, would you? Something with a little extra punch to keep me awake on my hike into work? We're about to get crazy. If you're not a coffee addict like me and don't know your caffeine dosing, I definitely don't recommend you try this. But in order to see into the future, we have to go into the past.
All right.
Earlier that day, I had the premonition that I would need to do something special. I brewed some Japanese iced coffee the same way I always do. Bloom, brew, and swirl, except this time I swirled and let the ice melt completely. Afterwards, I poured the coffee into an ice tray, and since I poured a bit too much, I used a straw to get some out. Then, into the freezer it went. And I cleaned, because ants. Now it's time to pull out the Chemex, just because. You follow the same process as before. 30 grams of coffee, place the filter, rinse it out, but then leave your paper filter aside because we need to add the ice. However, not just any ice. We will be using the coffee ice we made earlier that day. We're going to add the same 250 grams of ice, except this is going to be a tad more potent, which is exactly what we want. Don't worry about the ice tray looking gnarly, it will wash off super easy. Then simply brew like you normally would.
That's potent. There you go. Thank you. Told you it was potent.